Jesus makes breakfast for his disciples and calls them to feed others. Now Jesus did many other signs in the presence of his disciples, which are not written in this book. But these are written so that you may come to believe that Jesus is the Messiah, the Son of God, and that through believing you may have life in his name. After these things, Jesus showed himself again to the disciples by the Sea of Tiberias, and he showed himself in this way. Gathered there together were Simon Peter, Thomas called the twin, Nathanael of Cana in Galilee, the sons of Zebedee, and two others of his disciples. Simon Peter said to them, "I'm going fishing." They said to him, "We will go with you." They went out and got into the boat, but that night they caught nothing. Just after daybreak, Jesus stood on the beach, but the disciples did not know that it was Jesus. Jesus said to them, "Children, have you no fish, have you?" They answered him, "No." He said, "Cast the net on the right side of the boat and you will find some." So they cast it, and now they were not able to haul it in because there were so many fish. That disciple whom Jesus loved said to Peter, "It is the Lord." When Simon Peter heard that it was the Lord, he put on some clothes, for he was naked, and jumped into the lake. But the other disciples came in the boat, dragging the net full of fish, for they were not far from the land, only about 100 yards off. When they had gone ashore, they saw a charcoal fire there with fish on it and bread. Jesus said to them, "Bring some of the fish that you have just caught." So Simon Peter went aboard and hauled the net ashore full of large fish, 153 of them. And though there were so many, the net was not torn. Jesus said to them, "Come and have breakfast." Now none of the disciples dared to ask him, "Who are you?" because they knew it was the Lord. Jesus came and took bread and gave it to them and did the same with the fish. This was now the third time that Jesus appeared to the disciples after he was raised from the dead. When they had finished breakfast, Jesus said to Simon Peter, "Simon, son of John, do you love me more than these?" He said to him, "Yes, Lord, you know that I love you." Jesus said to him, "Feed my lambs." A second time he said to him, "Simon, son of John, do you love me?" He said to him, "Yes, Lord, you know that I love you." Jesus said to him, "Tend my sheep." He said to him a third time, "Simon, son of John, do you love me?" Peter felt hurt because he said to him a third time, "Do you love me?" And he said to him, "Lord, you know everything. You know that I love you." Jesus said to him, "Feed my sheep. Very truly, I tell you, when you were younger, you used to fasten your own belt and to go wherever you wished. But when you grow old, you will stretch out your hands, and someone else will fasten a belt around you and take you where you do not wish to go." He said this to indicate the kind of death by which Peter would glorify God. After this, he said to him, "Follow me." Peter turned and saw the disciple whom Jesus loved following him. He was the one who had reclined next to Jesus at supper and had said, "Lord, who is it who is going to betray you?" When Peter saw him, he said to Jesus, "Lord, what about him?" Jesus said to him, "If it is my will that he remain until I come, what is it to you? Follow me." So the rumor spread in the community that this disciple would not die. This is the disciple who is testifying to these things and has written them, and we know that his testimony is true. But there are also many other things that Jesus did. If every one of them were written down, I suppose it would that the world itself could not contain the books that would be written. The gospel of the Lord. Praise to you, O Christ. Maybe you guys have seen the movie or the play Fiddler on the Roof. Everybody, right? Maybe you starred in Fiddler on the Roof. Maybe you sang in Fiddler on the Roof. Maybe your family. It's a good play for communities, for high schools. The original Broadway production opened in 1964 and had the first musical theater run in history to surpass 3,000 performances. Fiddler held the record for longest running Broadway musical for almost 10 years. It's based on Tevye, the Dairyman, and other tales written by Shalom Aleichem. The story takes place in a village of Anatevka. It's a look back at life in the Pale of Settlement, an area of Imperial Russia to which Jews were confined. Jesus said to Peter, Do you love me? When I hear that question from Jesus, I hear Fiddler on the Roof. Do you love me? I think of the Jewish people living in the Ukraine, oppressed and attacked by Imperial Russia. In her book, People Love Dead Jews, Dara Horn talks about the many forms of anti-Semitism and how it sometimes is masked as something else. How Soviet Russia talked about celebrating Yiddish culture, but ultimately sought to manipulate it, as it did everything else. It might be hard for you to imagine Jesus as a cast member of Fiddler on the Roof, but it shouldn't be. There's something very biblical about the story of God's people holding on fiercely to their traditions when a repressive regime seems unnerved by their dissident belief system. As we look to the news from the Ukraine, we realize how old that battle is. Back through the centuries of Russian imperialism, back to Persian imperialism, Babylon, Roman imperialism, Greek hegemony, Egypt's divine emperor. They're all built on an ideology of supremacy, of one group, one religion, one nation, one race being superior to others, strict gender roles and class separations. These ideas of separate groups being needed to keep separate from each other plays on a fear of scarcity. We're all in this competition, and tribal loyalty seems to be necessary for survival. The gospel, in contrast, is about God's generosity, God's grace, God's provision. God will provide. The disciples on the boat hear someone on the beach. They don't know who it is. And then there is a flash of recognition. The sudden overabundance of fish in nets that failed to catch anything overnight. That sudden appearance of abundance caused a flash of recognition. It is the Lord. The beloved disciple sees who it is, shows everyone else up again. Jesus is recognized. Jesus is seen in abundance. Today we conclude our series on John, so we get some champagne and pop a cork. Think back over what we've read in John's gospel. As you go further into John's gospel, things keep coming up that you recollect. Echoes in later chapters bring you back. And today I'm recalling John 10, where Jesus says, I am the good shepherd. Today, Jesus calls on his disciples to be shepherds, tending, caring, feeding his sheep. Jesus says he is the good shepherd, and the good shepherd lays down his life for the sheep. I am the good shepherd, Jesus says. And we talked about all those I am statements. I am the bread of the world. I am the light. I am the way and the truth and the life. All those I am statements from Jesus in John's gospel, culminating in Jesus's arrest. Are you Jesus of Nazareth? I am. Then Peter follows Jesus. Jesus is in custody. Peter follows along, sits outside the gate by a fire. Are you not one of his followers? I am not. It's meant to be a contrast. Jesus is inside. I am. Peter outside. Are you a disciple? I am not. Today is another fire. There are only 2 fire stories in this gospel. The last fire, Peter denies Jesus, I am not a disciple. At this fire, Jesus asks, do you love me, Simon Peter? 3 times Peter was asked if he was a follower of Jesus. Today he is asked 3 times if he loves Jesus. It's not fun to be asked something twice, let alone 3 times. And Peter's hurt. The question is for us. When we hear this question, it is for us. We are to care for Jesus's sheep. When we think about Jesus's sheep, Jesus's fold, do we think just about Christians? Does that mean we only care for Christians? John's gospel is where Jesus says, I am the good shepherd. It's also where Jesus says, I have other sheep. John 10:16, I have other sheep which are not of this fold, and I must bring them also. Feed my sheep. Is that just the disciples that Peter knew? Is it just for us today's Christians? Of course not. When you guys bring food to Carver Center, when you make bags of food for the school children, we don't say this is for Christians only. Of course not. Jesus wants us to feed everyone, no one to be excluded. Tend and care for everyone, build a community for everyone. In John's gospel, Jesus speaks of being a shepherd, the good shepherd. And as he leaves, he tells us to tend to feed the lambs, feed the sheep. Not just one group of sheep, but the other sheep too. In John's gospel, of course, it says, God so loves the world. God loves the world through our hands. We who tend and feed and gather and comfort, the shepherd provides, and the shepherd also protects. The Lord is my shepherd, as the psalm says, I shall not want. John is clearly thinking of Psalm 23 when he talks about the shepherd. God prepares a table before me. My cup runneth over. I shall not want. No one should want for food. The shepherd provides, the shepherd protects. Thy rod and thy staff, the shepherd's crook, to chase away the wolf. As we look back over all of John's gospel, I wish John's gospel was always so straightforward and inclusive. But as one of you had asked me one Sunday, doesn't it also say, no one comes to the Father except through me? John is not always inclusive. Sometimes he's downright exclusive. The Bible is complicated, contradictory. Sometimes the complications help us to appreciate mystery. Sometimes the contradictions help us to understand paradoxical thinking. Sometimes it's just wrong. It won't always flow together. And that's because it's not all from one source. Today's reading begins with a conclusion. We read in chapter 20, a conclusion to the gospel. But then there's also chapter 21, which also has a conclusion. Chapter 21 tells us that there was a rumor that the beloved disciple would not die, that rumor was erroneous. What does that mean? It means that the author of John's gospel died and people added a note to say, Jesus never said he wouldn't die. That was a rumor. This tells us that the gospel, as we have it today, has been added to by other writers. They added something after the beloved author died. In some ways, the Bible is very complicated. In some ways, the gospel is completely clear. In some ways, the Bible is crystal clear. What's the takeaway from today's reading? Take care of people. Help people. That's not complicated. Although sometimes we seem to make it complicated. Tend, unfold, gather, and protect a community. Jesus says, if you love me, you will feed people. Jesus says, I am the good shepherd. I will lay down my life for you. John's gospel says, God so loved the world. If you love Jesus, love the world. But we get all caught up in all kinds of knots. Should we help that person? I think they're on drugs. Should we help that person? No, they're not straight. Should we help that person? They're not from this country. Should we help that person? Can't they get a job? Jesus makes it simple. Don't look for deserving people to help. Help people who need help. Don't look for people who will appreciate your help or make the most of your help. Someone needs help, we help. Why? Because we love Jesus. Serve others for the sake of Jesus, not for their deserving. Love people because Jesus, the Good Shepherd, laid down his life for us. Serve others for the sake of Jesus, not their own deserving. But we live in a world where groups are pitted against each other in competition, and groups are demonized as not deserving, dehumanized. There is often a view of the world where people are separate and must be kept separate. That's a view that spreads fear, and it is a view of scarcity. There's not enough for everybody, that view says. Take care of yourself, take care of your own. We're all scraping and searching for scraps. But that's not the gospel. The gospel rejects scarcity thinking. The gospel is abundance. God's love is for everyone. And so in today's reading, Jesus is recognized. They don't recognize him until Jesus is recognized. Jesus is seen in abundance.